Lieutenant Hornblower by C.S. Forrester. The text for this reading, for anybody interested, can actually be found in the link in the description. It's provided as part of the Gutenberg Project, which is a website that essentially does digitized versions of out-of-print and or public domain texts. Fortunately, this particular edition seems to be in the public domain as per Canadian copyright laws, so if anybody of you want to read along or follow the text, please feel free to do so. Chapter 1. Lieutenant William Bush came on board HMS Renown as she lay at anchor in the Hamoaze, and reported himself to the officer of the watch, who was a tall and rather gangling individual with hollow cheeks and a melancholy cast of countenance, whose uniform looked as if it had been put on in the dark and not readjusted since. "Glad to have you aboard, sir," said the officer of the watch. "My name's Hornblower, the captain's ashore. First lieutenant went forward with the boatswain 10 minutes ago." "Thank you," said Bush. He looked keenly round him at the infinity of activities which were making the ship ready for a long period of service in distant waters. "Hey there, you with the stay tackles! Handsomely, handsomely, belay!" Hornblower was bellowing this order over Bush's shoulder. "Mr. Hobbs, keep an eye on what your men are doing there." "Aye, aye, sir," came a sulky reply. "Mr. Hobbs, lay aft here." A paunchy individual with a thick grey pigtail came rolling aft to where Hornblower stood with Bush at the gangway. He blinked up at Hornblower with the sun in his eyes. The sunlight lit up the sprouting grey beard on his tiers of chins. "Mr. Hobbs," said Hornblower. He spoke quietly, but there was an intensity of spirit underlying his words that surprised Bush. "That powder's got to come aboard before nightfall, and you know it, so don't use that tone of voice when replying to an order. Answer cheerfully another time. How are you going to get the men to work if you sulk? Now get forward and see to it." Hornblower was leaning a little forward as he spoke. The hands which he clasped behind him served apparently to balance the jutting chin, but his attitude was negligent compared with the fierce intensity with which he spoke, even though he was speaking in an undertone, inaudible to all except the three of them. "Aye, aye, sir," said Hobbs, turning to go forward again. Bush was making a mental note that this Hornblower was a firebrand when he met his glance and saw, to his surprise, a ghost of a twinkle in their melancholy depths. In a flash of insight, he realized that this fierce young lieutenant was not fierce at all, and that the intensity with which he spoke was entirely assumed. It was almost as if Hornblower had been exercising himself in a foreign language. "If they start sulking, you can't do anything with them," explained Hornblower. "And Hobbs is the worst of them. Acting gunner and no good. Lazy as they make him." "I see," said Bush. The duplicity, play-acting of the young lieutenant aroused a momentary suspicion in Bush's mind. A man who could assume an appearance of wrath and abandon it again with so much faculty was not to be trusted. But then, with an inevitable reaction, the twinkle in the brown eyes called up a responsive twinkle in Bush's frank blue eyes, and he felt a friendly impulse towards Hornblower. But Bush was innately cautious, and checked the impulse at once, for there was a long voyage ahead of them, and plenty of time for a more considered judgment. Meanwhile, he was conscious of a keen scrutiny, and he could see that a question was imminent, and even Bush could guess what it would be. The next moment proved him right. "What's the date of your commission?" asked Hornblower. "July 96, said Bush. "Thank you," said Hornblower, in a flat tone that conveyed so little information that Bush had to ask the question in his turn. "What's the date of yours?" "August 97, said Hornblower. "You're senior to me. You're senior to Smith, too. January 97. "Are you the junior lieutenant, then?" "Yes," said Hornblower. His tone did not reveal any disappointment that the newcomer had proved to be senior to him, but Bush could guess at it. Bush knew by very recent experience what it was to be the junior lieutenant in a ship of the line. "You're the third, then," went on Hornblower. "Smith fourth, and I'm fifth." "I'll be third," mused Bush, more to himself than to anybody else. Every lieutenant could at least dream, even lieutenants like Bush with no imagination at all. Promotion was at least theoretically possible. From the caterpillar stage of lieutenant, one might progress to the butterfly stage of captain, sometimes even without a chrysalis period as commander. Lieutenants undoubtedly were promoted on occasions, most of them, as was to be expected, being men who had friends at court or in Parliament, or had been fortunate enough to attract the attention of an admiral, and then lucky enough to be under that admiral's command at the moment when a vacancy occurred. Most of the captains on the list owed their promotion to one or other of such causes. But sometimes, a lieutenant won his promotion through merit, through a combination of merit and good fortune at least, and sometimes sheer blind chance brought it about. If a ship distinguished herself superlatively in some historic action, the first lieutenant might be promoted. Oddly enough, that promotion was considered a compliment to her captain, or, if the captain should be killed in the action, even a moderate success might result in a step for the senior surviving lieutenant who took his place. On the other hand, some brilliant boat action, some dashing exploit on shore, might win promotion for the lieutenant in command. But the senior, of course. The chances were few enough in all conscience, but they were at least chances. But of those chances, the great majority went to the senior lieutenant, to the first lieutenant. The chances of the junior lieutenant were doubly few, so that whenever a lieutenant dreamed of attaining the rank of captain, with its dignity and security and prize money, he soon found himself hearkening back to the consideration of his seniority as lieutenant. If this next commission of the Renowns took her away to some place where other lieutenants could not be sent on board by an admiral with favourites, there were at least 2 lives between Bush and the position of first lieutenant, with all its added chances of promotion. Naturally, he thought about that. Equally naturally, he did not spare a thought for the fact that the man with whom he was conversing was divided by 4 lives from that same position. But still, it's the West Indies for us anyway, said Hornblower philosophically. Yellow fever, ague, hurricanes, poisonous serpents, bad water, tropical heat, putrid fever, and 10 times more chances of action than with the Channel Fleet. That's so, agreed Bush appreciatively. With only 3 and 4 years seniority as lieutenants, respectively, the 2 young men, and with young men's confidence in their own immortality, could face the dangers of West Indian service with some complacence. "Captain's coming off, sir," reported the midshipman of the watch hurriedly. Hornblower whipped his telescope to eye and trained it on the approaching shoreboat. "Quite right," he said. "Run forward and tell Mr. Buckland. Boatswain's mates, side boys, lively now." Captain Sawyer came up through the entry port, touched his hat to the quarterdeck, and looked suspiciously round him. The ship was in the condition of confusion to be expected when she was completing for foreign service, but that hardly justified the sidelong, shifty glances which Sawyer darted about him. He had a big face and a prominent hawk nose which he turned this way and that as he stood on the quarterdeck. He caught sight of Bush, who came forward and reported himself. "You came in my absence, did you?" asked Sawyer. "Yes, sir," said Bush, a little surprised. "Who told you I was on shore?" "Well, no one, sir." "How did you guess it, then?" "I didn't guess it, sir. I didn't know you were on shore until Mr. Hornblower told me." "Mr. Hornblower? So you know each other already?" "No, sir. I reported to him when I came on board." "So that you could have a few private words without my knowledge?" "No, sir." Bush bit off the "of course not," which he was about to add. Brought up in a hard school, Bush had learned to utter no unnecessary words when dealing with a superior officer, indulging in the touchiness superior officers might be expected to indulge in. Yet this particular touchiness seemed more unwarranted even than usual. "I'll have you know I allow no one to conspire behind my back, Mr. Bush," said the captain. "Aye, aye, sir." Bush met the captain's searching stare with the composure of innocence, but he was doing his best to keep his surprise out of his expression too, and, as he was no actor, the struggle may have been evident. "You wear your guilt on your face, Mr. Bush," said the captain. "I'll remember this." With that, he turned away and went below, and Bush, relaxing from his attitude of attention, turned to express his surprise to Hornblower. He was eager to ask questions about this extraordinary behaviour, but they died away in his lips when he saw that Hornblower's face was set in a wooden unresponsiveness. Puzzled, and a little hurt, Bush was about to note Hornblower down as one of the captain's toadies, or as a madman as well, when he caught sight out of the tail of his eye of the captain's head reappearing above the deck. Sawyer must have swung round when the foot of the companion and come up again, simply for the purpose of catching his officers off their guard discussing him, and Hornblower knew more about his captain's habits than Bush did. Bush made an enormous effort to appear natural. "Can I have a couple of hands to carry my sea chest down?" he asked, hoping that the words did not sound nearly as stilted to the captain as they did to his own ears. "Of course, Mr. Bush," said Hornblower, with a formidable formality. "See to it, if you please, Mr. James." snorted the captain, and disappeared once more down the companion. Hornblower flickered one eyebrow at Bush, but that was the only indication he gave, even then, of any recognition that the captain's actions were at all unusual, and Bush, as he followed his sea chest down to his cabin, realized with dismay that this was a ship where no one ventured on any decisive expression of opinion. But the Renown was completing for sea, amid all the attendant bustle and confusion, and Bush was on board, legally one of her officers, and there was nothing he could do except reconcile himself philosophically to his fate. He would have to live through this commission, unless any of the possibilities catalogued by Hornblower in their first conversation should save him the trouble.